clear day in midsummer, Lake Superior looks deceptively gentle, wide as a prairie and bright as a coin. Somewhere far off the Michigan shore, where the compass settles and the horizon wraps you in a perfect circle, a granite tower rises out of the water with no hint of land in sight. For generations of keepers and Coast Guardsmen, this was the loneliest place on the continent. Stannard Rock Lighthouse. It is a station defined by absence, no harbour, no shoreline, no neighbours, yet it is also a monument to presence, the human stubbornness that builds a citadel in open water simply because mariners needed a light. In the age of sail, charts did not warn of every tooth in Superior's jaw. On August 26, 1835, Master Navigator Captain Charles C. Stannard discovered an unmarked pinnacle, so far from shore in waters thought to be clear of all hazards. The offshore shoal, later named for him, sat squarely near the Sault to Duluth Lane, a submerged menace in a lake famous for sudden gales. For years, mariners spoke of it as one of the most treacherous reefs in the entire Great Lakes. And wisely so. Nothing is more dangerous than a rock you can't see until the waves begin to comb white over it. The US Lighthouse Service eventually marked the spot with a day beacon in 1868, testing whether anything could survive there through Superior's winters. Only when that experimental marker endured a few seasons of storms and ice did engineers concede the unthinkable. They would raise a permanent light where no land rose above the waterline. The audacity of Stannard Rock's construction lives in the details. There was no emergent rock to bolt into. The tower would stand on a heavy, engineered crib sunk into 11 feet of water, its innards packed with tons upon tons of concrete and stone. Engineers borrowed experience and equipment from another daunting project, Spectacle Reef Light in northern Lake Huron, then established a shore base they nicknamed Stannardsville, near Scanney, Michigan. There they quarried, shaped, and pre-fit the tower's sandstone blocks, some weighing 12 to 30 tons, before ferrying them out and reassembling the whole structure, course by interlocking course, pinned with heavy iron drift bolts. In a good summer, work might proceed steadily. In a Superior summer, the crew sometimes laboured only 61% of the time, as storms repeatedly drove them off the reef. Each spring brought repairs to winter damage before true progress could begin. It took 5 arduous years and a staggering sum for the era, slightly more than $300,000, to complete the tower. The first light was shown on July 4, 1882. Fittingly for so independent a structure, it declared its presence on Independence Day. Work continued into 1883 to finish out the details. Numbers tell the other half of the story. Government records note the station was established in 1868 with the day beacon, and the stone tower first lit in 1882. A third-order Fresnel lens sent its rays outward. The lantern focal plane elevated roughly 102 feet above the lake's surface. The tower's conical stone form rose from a cylindrical crib, an architecture as much fortress as lighthouse. Automation would come in 1962, long after keepers had endured the place's legendary solitude. Distance defines Stannard Rock. It sits about 42 miles north of Marquette and roughly 25 miles southeast of Michigan's Keweenaw Point, completely out of sight of land in all but the most exceptional conditions. Old-time keepers, and later Coast Guardsmen, called it the loneliest place in North America. Some, with gallows humour, called it Stranded Rock, and a posting there sometimes carried the reputation of punishment duty. If you mess up in the 9th District, they'll ship you to Stannard Hyperbole. Perhaps. But the tower's isolation was, still is, absolute. The building itself is a compact, vertical world. 7 principal levels climb from galley to sleeping quarters, to a library reading room, and finally to the watch and lens rooms. At the base, walls are 7.5 feet thick, tapering to just under 2 feet near the lantern, stone mass to resist wave shock. In the heyday of steam signals, a separate engine house on the crib held boilers and whistles. It was as close as engineers could come to permanence in a place where nothing was permanent but motion. On Superior, storms don't just strike, they occupy. Northwest blows drove 30-foot seas into the crib, exploding into white towers that climbed over the parapet and sheeted up the lantern glass. Keepers reported cans rattling from shelves and crockery skittering off tables when the whole masonry tube shuddered from a long-period wave. In the worst weather, men clipped on lifelines just across the crib. Winter was worse. Crews sometimes chopped through 10 feet of ice to reach doors entombed beneath frozen spray. Rescue and relief could be delayed for days by locked-in flows. In one notorious north blow in 1913, the entire tower allegedly wore a carapace of ice, 12 feet thick, a stark sculpture announcing the costs of duty on Superior in November. Because Stannard Rock was so remote, it was a stag station. No families lived here, only crews of men cycling on and off. The work was monotonous in fair weather, terrifying in storms, and psychologically grueling in the dead calm between. Some keepers thrived, taking pride in the regularity of the watch, the never-failing whip, the clean brass, the well-tuned fog signal. Others fled at the first chance. Records show early keepers transferring out quickly. One Coast Guardsman in the 1950s recalled a lot of cribbage and a lot of canned food, a bland diet that suited the colourless horizon. The law, that essential subtext of lighthouse life, says a man once left the rock in a straitjacket during the 1940s. In the 1950s, another reportedly threatened over the radio to jump in and start swimming if the boat didn't come at once. Tales like these captured a truth, even if the particulars were retold with embellishment. Isolation works on the mind. The Coast Guard eventually limited tours and allowed men to choose their next duty station. An institutional acknowledgement that solitude can be a hazard too. The summer of 1961 should have been routine at Stannard Rock Lighthouse. By then, the great age of lighthouse keepers was fading into memory. Automation was on the horizon, and the US Coast Guard had taken over the old lighthouse service duties. But for 4 men stationed on Superior's loneliest outpost, the season would end not in routine, but in fire. That June, 4 Coast Guardsmen made up the lighthouse detachment. Engineman First Class William Bill Maxwell, 35 years old, the most experienced of the group. Seaman Walter Scobie, just 22, still learning the rhythms of duty. Seaman Richard Horn, only 18, the youngest, and full of nervous energy. Electrician's mate, Oscar Daniels, 23, who had come temporarily to work on the electrical systems in preparation for automation. Their officer in charge, boatswain's mate Walter Patterson, 34, happened to be ashore on leave. Had he been at the station, the story might have played out differently, or perhaps not. Fate spared him from the night that followed. On June 16th, the day passed with the ordinary chores of lighthouse life, maintaining machinery, checking the radio, and preparing meals from the same canned goods stacked in the cramped pantry. With Superior unusually calm, there was little sense of foreboding. At 9:30 that night, the men were winding down, some resting in bunks, others playing cards, when it happened. A thunderous blast shook the tower. More than 1,000 gallons of gasoline stored in the engine house exploded, igniting a chain reaction that hurled fire through the heart of the station. Machinery clattered to the floor, lamps shattered, heat seared the stone walls. The tower itself quivered like a struck bell. The fire spread instantly. Propane tanks stacked for cooking and heat fed the inferno. Coal bunkers caught, filling the air with smoke. Within minutes, the narrow stairwell, the only path of escape, was impassable. The men had no choice but to flee upward and outward. They scrambled through smoke and sparks until they reached the outer crib, exposed to the elements. There, they huddled under a canvas tarp, the flames behind them turning the tower into a torch in the middle of the lake. Imagine it. 4 men marooned on a tiny platform in the dead of night, surrounded by black water and fire. The air reeked of burning fuel. The tower roared like a furnace. Above, the sky glittered with indifferent stars. And all around, 40 miles in every direction, there was nothing but Superior. Maxwell, the eldest, was badly burned. His comrades did what they could with makeshift bandages, but medical supplies were scant. The others suffered lesser injuries, but none were untouched. They were confident, at first, that help would come quickly. The light had gone dark, and their scheduled radio check-ins were being missed. Surely, they thought, the Coast Guard would notice and dispatch aid. But the silence stretched on. Hours bled into days. June nights are short, but they were cold and cruel on that open platform. The men rationed what little they had, wrapping themselves in the tarp for warmth. They drank sparingly from water tanks, though even that was contaminated by smoke and soot. They watched the horizon for a rescue ship, but nothing appeared. The vastness of Superior swallowed their distress. The tower that once kept watch over mariners now seemed like a prison, its fire-gutted interior inaccessible, its beacon extinguished. Maxwell's condition worsened. By the second night, he slipped into shock. His burns were too severe, the wait too long. At dawn, on June 18th, he died, leaving 3 young men to mourn him in silence, surrounded by fire-blackened stone and endless water. Fate intervened that same day. The Coast Guard cutter Woodrush, on routine patrol, spotted the column of smoke still rising faintly from the tower. When the ship drew close, the crew saw the figures waving frantically from the crib. The 3 survivors, Scobie, Horn, and Daniels, were hauled aboard, weak, soot-streaked, and shaken. Maxwell's body was recovered with solemn care. Only then did the full tragedy become clear. For 2 days, men had been stranded at the Loneliest light, with no one aware of their plight. The exact cause of the explosion was never determined with certainty. Investigators concluded that gasoline fumes, perhaps ignited by a spark from machinery, perhaps by mishandling, were to blame. It was a cruel irony. The very fuel meant to power the fog signal and machinery had destroyed the heart of the station. The disaster underscored what many in the Coast Guard already knew. Stannard Rock was too dangerous, too remote, too isolated for continued manned duty. Within a year, in 1962, the light was automated. The keepers never returned. For many, the fire marked the symbolic end of Stannard Rock's human era. The tower stood, blackened at first, later restored. But its days of housing crews were over. The rock had claimed its final victim. Among Great Lakes mariners, it is sometimes said that Stannard Rock is haunted not by the madness of solitude, but by Maxwell's sacrifice. Fishermen and visiting researchers have reported strange sensations near the engine room ruins. The smell of smoke where there is none, or the faint echo of machinery turning. Rational minds explain it as the imagination, or the tower's natural groans. Yet, for those who know the story, it is hard not to feel that Maxwell still keeps a lonely watch. Compared with famously haunted beacons like Point Lookout or the Flannan Isles' vanished keepers, Stannard Rock has relatively little in the way of formally documented spectre stories. Yet the station appears often in Great Lakes ghost lore collections because the ingredients are irresistible: isolation, tragedy, storms, long nights, and the psychological strain that breeds uneasy footsteps in empty rooms. The best-founded haunting at Stannard Rock is the place itself, the way it alters perception. Visitors describe the tower's interior as downright spooky, a maze of concrete corridors under the crib where a flashlight beam seems to be swallowed by the dark. One veteran lighthouse historian wrote of turning off his light and feeling a primal dread at the idea it might not turn back on. These are not cold spots and chains. They're the small terrors of deep solitude that our species evolved to avoid. If legends of a straitjacketed evacuee or a desperate radio call tend to grow more dramatic in the retelling, they still point to an authentic haunting. A loneliness so complete it can sound like voices in the wind. Readers of regional maritime folklore will find Stannard Rock cited among haunted Great Lakes places. But specific, sourced paranormal incidents at this station are scarce compared with the region's more populated light stations. That very scarcity is telling. Here, the ghost story is subtle. A sense of being watched by the horizon, an engine room echo that doesn't quite fade, the steady, low thrum of the tower in a swell, like the breath of something asleep within the stone. This assessment draws on the lighthouse's widely reported isolation effects and the historically attested hardships rather than on a discrete body of verified paranormal events. Its human story is the companion to that engineering tale. People lived where people were not meant to live. Every day, unglamorous labour in a place that punished mistakes. They tended a lens, ate canned food, played cribbage, fought greasing spray in November, and looked forward to the distant thrum of a relief boat. In the end, the lighthouse did what lighthouses were made to do. It warned mariners off the reef, quietly and for decades, in all weathers. Imagine arrival by small boat in a confused chop, deck slamming, spray flying. The first impression is geometry. A low circular crib like a stone medallion, the cylinder of the base, the narrowing cone of the tower, the black iron lantern like a crown above it all. A handline secures you to a cleat set in the parapet, knuckles white as you time a jump. Then you're up, soaked, boots ringing on iron. Inside, the air is stone cool and smells faintly of oil and old paint. The galley is a pocket universe, stove, table, lockers. The wind rises and you feel the tower's faint, elastic yielding, the same way you feel a ship flex. You climb, levels marked by heavy doors and narrow landings. The sleeping quarters are functional and Spartan, bunks made taut, a brave calendar tacked to a beam. The library has a few favoured volumes, navigation texts, a well-thumbed novel, perhaps, in later years, a radio. Finally, the watchroom, where time is kept in ink and the horizon has no edges, only changes in grey. Above that, the lantern room, prisms once, now a compact modern optic that blinks its own heart into the night. Your reflection passes across the glass, a double exposure with the empty lake. Every lighthouse has a personality. Stannard's is stoic. If it whispers of work, of loading coal, polishing brass, sounding fog, logging the wind, checking the wick, checking it again, and, in the darkest hour, listening to the weather, because the weather has a way of knowing when you're tired. If you were tempted to measure Stannard Rock by usefulness alone, you might argue that satellites and GPS made it an anachronism. That misses the point. The tower is a proof of concept about human intention. It says, there was a treacherous reef in open water, and we chose to post a watch there. It says, a small group of people decided that strangers' lives mattered enough to build a stone spine in a place where waves are born. The tragedy of 1961 underscores the cost of that choice. The survival of the tower and the data now gathered from it underscores its ongoing value. As for the paranormal, if the rock is haunted, it's haunted by absence, by footprintless snow on a steel deck in February, by dead calm days in August when the lake turns to mercury and the only sound is your breath echoing up the stair. By the memory of a lens rediscovered and the names of men who stood a lonely watch and sometimes did not come home. And on certain nights, cold, clear, the stars tight and near, the tower still blinks. A quiet syllable in a language older than radio. Keep off the reef. Someone is watching.